Doug Henderson was having one of those days where everything seemed determined to test his patience. His alarm had failed to go off that morning, his taxi to the airport had hit unexpected traffic, and now his connecting flight to Los Angeles had been delayed by nearly 3 hours. By the time he finally boarded the aircraft, his nerves were frayed, and his normally pleasant demeanor had evaporated like morning dew under a hot sun. "Excuse me, sir. That's 14A window seat," the flight attendant said with a rehearsed smile as she checked his boarding pass. Doug nodded curtly and made his way down the aisle of first class, dragging his carry-on behind him. The upgrade had been the one bright spot in his day, a last-minute perk from all the business travel miles he'd accumulated. After the day he was having, he felt he deserved the extra comfort. As he approached his row, however, he saw that someone was already sitting in what should have been his window seat. The figure was turned away, looking out the small oval window as afternoon sunlight streamed in, creating a silhouette. The man wore a simple black cap pulled low and had shoulder-length dark hair. Doug checked his boarding pass again. Seat 14A was definitely his. After the day he'd had, this final inconvenience felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke. The exhaustion of the day, the stress of his upcoming presentation in Los Angeles, and the lingering frustration of the delay all converged into a moment of uncharacteristic boldness. "Excuse me," Doug said, his voice sharper than he intended. When the figure didn't immediately respond, something inside him snapped. "Hey, that's my seat," he said, louder this time, causing several nearby passengers to look up from their pre-flight routines. "You need to move back to economy." The cabin grew suddenly quiet. A teenager across the aisle stopped mid-text, her eyes widening. An elderly woman wearing pearls brought her hand to her mouth. Even the background hum of conversation seemed to fade away, leaving Doug's words hanging in the air. The man in the cap slowly turned from the window, and Doug felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. Looking up at him with gentle, questioning eyes was none other than Keanu Reeves. Doug stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as the realization of what he'd just done washed over him. He'd just yelled at one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood, a man known worldwide for his kindness and humility. For Doug, time seemed to stand still. He became acutely aware of the other passengers watching, of the flight attendant hurrying down the aisle toward them, of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The actor hadn't said a word yet, just regarded him with those calm, thoughtful eyes that millions of fans would recognize anywhere. 8 hours earlier, Doug's day had started with the muffled sound of his phone buzzing somewhere in his hotel room. He'd fumbled to silence it before realizing it wasn't his alarm but a call from his boss. "Doug, where are you? The meeting with the Chicago team started 15 minutes ago." His boss's voice had crackled through the speaker. Doug had shot up in bed, squinting at the hotel clock in disbelief. Somehow he'd slept through his alarm, and now he was catastrophically late for the final meeting before heading back to Los Angeles. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he'd promised, already rushing to the bathroom. In his haste, he'd left his phone on the nightstand, missing 3 messages from his wife about their son's science fair project that evening, an event he was already going to miss due to this business trip. The meeting had gone poorly. Doug, normally meticulous and prepared, had appeared disheveled and distracted. The Chicago team had seemed unimpressed with the quarterly projections, and his boss had pulled him aside afterward. "Pull yourself together before the Los Angeles presentation, Henderson. The Clark account is too important to lose." After a rushed and unsatisfying lunch eaten while simultaneously packing his suitcase, Doug had checked out of the hotel and headed to the airport. The taxi driver had taken a route that led them straight into midday construction, adding another 40 minutes to what should have been a quick trip. At the airport, Doug had discovered his flight was delayed, first by an hour, then 2, then nearly 3. He'd paced the terminal, made tense phone calls to reschedule his evening plans in Los Angeles, and watched as his carefully organized day unraveled completely. When the gate agent had mentioned they were offering first-class upgrades at a reduced rate due to the delay, Doug had jumped at the chance. At least he could be comfortable and maybe even get some sleep on the flight. Now standing in the aisle of the plane, looking down at Keanu Reeves, all of that context evaporated. None of it mattered. He was just a man who had rudely shouted at another man over an airplane seat. "I'm so sorry," Doug finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize." The flight attendant arrived at that moment, her professional smile strained. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Before either man could respond, phones appeared from several directions, passengers eager to capture the interaction. The soft clicking of camera apps filled the awkward silence. "There seems to be a mix-up with our seats," Keanu said, his voice calm and measured as he glanced at his own boarding pass. His tone held no hint of celebrity entitlement or annoyance at being confronted. The flight attendant looked from Keanu's boarding pass to Doug's, her brow furrowing in confusion. "You both have been assigned 14A. I'm so sorry about this mistake. Let me check what happened." Doug felt as if every eye on the plane was burning into him. His earlier frustrations now seemed petty and insignificant compared to the mortification washing over him. A business traveler across the aisle was not so subtly recording the entire interaction on his phone. Two college-age girls several rows back were whispering excitedly to each other, pointing in their direction. "I can take another seat," Doug offered quickly. "It's absolutely no problem." Keanu shook his head. "No need. I'm happy to move if there's been a mix-up." A younger flight attendant appeared, whispering something to the first. Both looked at Keanu with that particular expression people get when they're trying very hard to be professional while meeting someone famous. "Mr. Reeves, we're so sorry for the confusion," the second flight attendant said. "It appears our system double-booked the seat. We have another first-class seat available if one of you would be willing to move." Doug, still standing awkwardly in the aisle with passengers trying to board around him, felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. The air conditioning of the plane seemed to have failed him completely. "I'll move," Keanu offered, already gathering his simple black backpack from under the seat. "No, please, I insist I should be the one to move," Doug countered, gesturing with his boarding pass. "I'm the one who made a scene." A small, knowing smile crossed Keanu's face. "It's really no trouble," he said, standing up. Even in this mundane moment, there was something about his presence that seemed both ordinary and extraordinary at once. As Keanu stepped into the aisle, the reality of the situation hit Doug anew. He had just shouted at John Wick, at Neo from The Matrix, at Theodore Ted Logan, but most unforgivably, he had shouted at Keanu Reeves, the internet's most beloved nice guy. The flight attendants were now conferring with each other, checking their tablets to sort out the seating arrangement. The plane's boarding process had essentially paused, with passengers bunching up in the aisle, many of them now aware of the celebrity in their midst. A young boy, no more than 10, tugged his mother's sleeve and stage whispered, "Mom, that's the guy from Fortnite." His mother quickly shushed him, looking embarrassed. Keanu just smiled, seemingly unbothered by the attention or the confusion. There was a patience about him that made Doug feel even worse about his outburst. "Looks like we have 2 first-class seats available," the lead flight attendant finally announced. "You can both stay in first class, Mr. Henderson. Would you mind taking 12C instead? It's an aisle seat." "Of course," Doug replied, relief washing over him. At least he wouldn't be banished to economy as a punishment for his behavior, which felt like nothing less than he deserved. As he moved toward his new seat, Doug couldn't help but glance back at Keanu, who was now settling back into 14A. Their eyes met briefly, and Doug felt compelled to say something, anything. "To make amends, I really am sorry about that," he said quietly. "It's been a long day, but that's no excuse." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. "We all have those days," he replied. "No worries." Just 3 simple words, but they lifted a weight from Doug's shoulders. As he stowed his carry-on and sat down in his new seat, he couldn't help but marvel at how quickly life could change. One minute he was an anonymous, cranky business traveler, and the next he was the guy who yelled at Keanu Reeves on a plane. A story that, based on the continued phone cameras pointed in their direction, would likely be on social media before they even took off. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, asking passengers to prepare for departure. Doug buckled his seatbelt and leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. The day wasn't over yet, and something told him this flight would be one he'd never forget. The airplane engines hummed to life as Doug settled into his new seat, 12C. The gentle vibration did nothing to calm his nerves. He couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head, the way his voice had risen, the sudden silence that followed, and the calm, unruffled expression on Keanu Reeves's face when he turned around. A flight attendant approached, leaning down slightly. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff, Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her voice professional but her eyes dancing with barely concealed amusement. Just water. Please, Doug managed to say, his throat suddenly dry. As she walked away, Doug noticed several passengers still stealing glances in his direction. A teenage girl 2 rows ahead kept turning around, her phone suspiciously positioned as if ready to capture any further interaction. An older businessman across the aisle gave him a look that seemed to say, "Way to go, pal." The reality of what had just happened was sinking in deeper with each passing minute. Doug had always considered himself a level-headed person. Back at the office, he was known for keeping his cool during tense negotiations. His wife often joked that he was pathologically polite to service workers. Yet here he was, having just created a scene with one of Hollywood's most respected actors, and not just any actor, Keanu Reeves. The internet's favorite celebrity, famous not just for his movies but for his genuine kindness. Stories about Reeves giving up his subway seat, secretly donating to children's hospitals, and treating film crews with respect circulated regularly online. Doug's teenage son had once spent an entire dinner recounting Keanu facts he'd found on Reddit. The flight attendant returned with his water. As Doug thanked her, he noticed her name tag, Tina. "Is there any way," he asked quietly, "that we could keep this incident, contained?" Tina gave him a sympathetic look, glancing around at the sea of phones. "I think that ship has sailed," she said kindly. "But if it helps, Mr. Reeves seems completely unbothered." Doug followed her gaze to where Keanu sat by the window, now flipping through the in-flight magazine with casual interest. There was no sign of offense or annoyance in his demeanor. As the plane began to taxi, the captain's voice crackled through the speakers, going through the standard pre-flight announcements. Doug tried to focus on the safety demonstration, desperate for anything to take his mind off his embarrassment. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from his boss. "Heard about the delay. Need you sharp for tomorrow's presentation. Get some rest on the flight." Rest seemed impossible now. Doug's mind raced with questions. Would videos of the incident be online before they landed? Would someone recognize him? Would this somehow get back to his company? He could already imagine the Monday morning jokes. "Hey Doug, seen any good movies lately?" The plane rose into the air, leaving Chicago behind. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin crew began preparing for drink service. Doug stared out the window at the patchwork of fields below, trying to gather his composure. A light tap on his shoulder startled him. He turned to find Tina standing there with another flight attendant, a younger man with a neat beard who was clearly struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "Mr. Henderson," Tina said. "This is my colleague, Pete. He had a question about your, seating arrangement." Pete cleared his throat. "Sir, we've sorted out the booking error. It appears our system assigned the same seat twice due to a glitch when the flight was rebooked after the delay." "I see," Doug said, not sure where this was going. "The thing is," Pete continued, lowering his voice, "Mr. Reeves has actually offered to switch back to your original seat if you'd prefer the window. He said he doesn't mind either way." Doug blinked in disbelief. After being publicly embarrassed by him, Keanu Reeves was offering to accommodate his seating preference? "No," Doug said firmly. "Absolutely not. Please tell Mr. Reeves I'm perfectly happy here." As Pete walked away, Doug noticed more phones pointed in his direction. A woman across the aisle wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. Her camera clearly trained on him. "Excuse me," Doug said to her, his patience wearing thin again. "Would you mind not filming me?" The woman, mid-50s, wearing an expensive-looking blazer, lowered her phone with a hint of embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said. "It's just not every day you see something like that happen. Are you two friends?" Doug almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "No, we're not friends. We've never met before. It was just a seating mix-up." "Oh." She looked disappointed, as if she'd been hoping for a better story. "Well, you handled it interestingly." Doug couldn't tell if she was being sarcastic or genuinely trying to be kind. He smiled weakly and turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. The drink cart made its way down the aisle. When it reached Keanu's row, Doug couldn't help but watch the interaction. The actor spoke quietly with the flight attendants, who both laughed at something he said. He declined a drink but accepted a small bag of pretzels with a grateful nod. There was something about watching this mundane exchange that made the situation even more surreal for Doug. Here was a man who had starred in films that grossed billions worldwide, whose face was recognized across the globe, politely accepting airline pretzels like any other traveler. As if sensing Doug's gaze, Keanu glanced in his direction. Their eyes met briefly, and to Doug's surprise, Keanu gave him a small, reassuring smile. It wasn't the tight, forced smile of someone being polite despite annoyance. It seemed genuine, almost conspiratorial, as if acknowledging the strangeness of their shared situation. Doug managed to return the smile before looking away. That simple exchange somehow made him feel both better and worse. Better because it suggested Keanu truly wasn't bothered. Worse because it reinforced what a genuinely decent person he had yelled at. 40 minutes into the flight, Doug's phone buzzed again. This time it was his wife, Lynn. "How's the flight? Did you get the upgrade?" Her text read. Doug stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. "Got the upgrade," he finally typed. "Having an interesting flight. Tell you about it later." 3 dots appeared immediately, showing Lynn was typing. Interesting how? "Everything okay?" "Fine," he responded. "Just a celebrity sighting. Talk when I land." As soon as he sent the message, he regretted mentioning the celebrity part. Lynn would demand details, and he wasn't ready to confess what had happened. He silenced his phone and slipped it into his pocket. The flight attendants were now serving lunch. When Tina reached his row, she handed him a tray with what appeared to be chicken and vegetables. "We have a white wine that pairs nicely with this," she suggested. "Complimentary in first class?" Doug hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." As she poured the wine, Tina leaned in slightly. "Just so you know," she said quietly, "Mr. Reeves asked if you were doing okay. He thought you seemed stressed." Doug nearly choked. "He asked about me?" Tina nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "He's like that. Notices people." Doug glanced toward Keanu again, but the actor was busy with his own meal, seemingly absorbed in a book he had pulled from his backpack. "Could you—" Doug hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "Could you tell him I'd like to apologize properly after the meal service?" "If he's willing," Tina nodded. "I'll let him know." As Doug picked at his lunch, the wine doing little to calm his nerves, he tried to think of what he would say. A simple apology didn't seem sufficient, but he didn't want to make a bigger scene by gushing or fawning over the actor either. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion several rows behind him. A man's voice rose above the ambient noise of the cabin. "Come on, just one picture. I paid for first class too." Doug turned to see a red-faced man standing in the aisle. His phone held out toward Keanu. 2 flight attendants, including Pete, were trying to intercede. "Sir, please return to your seat," Pete was saying, his voice firm but quiet. "It's just a picture," the man insisted. "Hey, Keanu, Neo. Just one selfie." Doug watched as Keanu handled the situation with remarkable grace. He didn't ignore the man or act annoyed. Instead, he simply said, "Not the best time, friend. Maybe after we land." The polite refusal, delivered with such calm assurance, seemed to take some of the wind out of the intrusive passenger's sails. Pete used the moment to guide the man back to his seat, speaking to him in hushed tones. The incident made Doug realize something. His own behavior, while embarrassing, probably wasn't the worst thing Keanu Reeves had dealt with from strangers. The thought was oddly comforting. When Tina collected his tray, she leaned down again. "Mr. Reeves said he'd be happy to chat with you whenever you're ready." "No rush," Doug nodded, taking a deep breath. He stood up, straightened his wrinkled suit jacket, and made his way down the aisle to seat 14A. As he approached, Keanu looked up from his book and removed his earbuds. His expression was open, curious rather than guarded. "Mr. Reeves," Doug began, his voice low enough that only they could hear. "I wanted to apologize properly for my behavior earlier. It was completely uncalled for, regardless of who you are." Keanu gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Want to sit for a minute?" Doug glanced around, aware of the eyes following his every move, then nodded and slid into the seat. "Rough day?" Keanu asked, marking his place in his book and giving Doug his full attention. There was something about the simple question, asked with such genuine interest, that made Doug's carefully planned apology speech evaporate. Instead, he found himself nodding. "The roughest," he admitted, "but that's no excuse for how I acted." Keanu shrugged. "We all have those days. Travel brings out the stress in people." "Still," Doug insisted, "I feel terrible about it." "Doug, right?" Keanu asked, having apparently caught his name during the booking confusion. Doug nodded, surprised and somewhat touched that the actor had remembered. Well, Doug, Keanu said with a slight smile, consider it forgotten. Life's too short to dwell on small things. As their conversation continued, Doug began to realize that the most remarkable thing about meeting Keanu Reeves wasn't the fame or the movies, or even the legendary kindness. It was how normal he made everything feel, despite the extraordinary circumstances. So what takes you to Los Angeles? Keanu asked, shifting slightly in his seat to face Doug more directly. The question was so normal, so everyday, that it momentarily threw Doug off balance. After all the tension and embarrassment, Keanu was making small talk as if they were just two travelers who happened to sit next to each other. Work presentation, Doug replied, still feeling slightly dazed by the surreal turn his day had taken. I'm in commercial real estate development. Nothing exciting? Keanu nodded thoughtfully. Buildings shape our cities, how people live. Sounds pretty important to me. Before Doug could respond, a soft chime sounded through the cabin, followed by the captain's voice announcing some turbulence ahead. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a ding. I should get back to my seat, Doug said, starting to rise. As if on cue, Tina appeared in the aisle. Gentlemen, we're expecting some rough air. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened. She glanced at Doug. Mr. Henderson, you should return to your seat as soon as possible. Doug nodded and turned to Keanu. Thanks for being so understanding about everything. No problem at all, Keanu replied with that same easy manner. Safe flight, Doug. As Doug made his way back to his seat, he noticed the intrusive passenger from earlier watching him with naked envy. Several other passengers followed him with their eyes, some whispering to their companions. Doug felt like he was part of some bizarre social experiment, the man who yelled at Keanu Reeves and somehow ended up chatting with him instead of being put in his place. The plane hit the first patch of turbulence just as Doug fastened his seatbelt. It wasn't severe, just enough to make the cabin rattle slightly and cause a few nervous gasps from more anxious flyers. Doug used the moment to check his phone again, switching it from airplane mode briefly. His stomach dropped. He had 3 texts from his son, all variations of the same message. Dad, are you on a plane with Keanu Reeves? Someone posted a video, so it had already happened. The incident was online, and somehow his 16-year-old son had already found it. Doug switched his phone back to airplane mode without responding. He'd deal with that particular horror once they landed. The turbulence increased and the drink service was temporarily suspended as the flight attendants secured the carts and took their seats. Doug closed his eyes, trying to center himself. The conversation with Keanu played on a loop in his mind. Despite his celebrity status, there was something remarkably grounded about the actor. He seemed to possess a quality Doug had been searching for his entire adult life, a sense of being completely comfortable in his own skin. When the rough air finally passed, Pete came through the cabin checking on passengers. He paused at Doug's row. Everything okay, sir? He asked. Fine, thanks, Doug replied. Listen, I'm sorry about earlier. Creating a scene like that. Pete waved away the apology. You'd be surprised at what we see on these flights. That barely registers on the scale of passenger incidents. Still, Doug insisted, I shouldn't have reacted that way. Pete's professional veneer cracked slightly and he leaned in. Between us, Mr. Reeves is one of the nicest celebrities we get on these routes. Some of them, he made a face. Let's just say they don't handle booking errors with the same grace. This small insight made Doug feel even worse about his behavior. Before he could respond, the plane suddenly dipped and shuddered, much more violently than before. Several passengers gasped. A child began crying somewhere in the back of the plane. Sorry about that, folks. The captain's voice came over the intercom. We're hitting some unexpected weather. Flight attendants, please return to your seats for now. Pete gave Doug a quick nod before hurrying back to his station. The turbulence continued for several minutes, the plane occasionally dropping in a way that made Doug's stomach lurch. He wasn't normally a nervous flyer, but combined with the stress of the day, he found himself gripping the armrests tightly. From his seat, he could see the back of Keanu's head. The actor hadn't moved, seemingly unfazed by the rocky flight. Doug wondered how many planes he'd been on in his career, flying to film locations around the world. Probably enough to make this little bit of turbulence seem routine. Eventually, the rough air subsided and the seatbelt sign dinged off. The cabin collectively relaxed. conversations resuming and the flight attendants returning to their service routine. Tina appeared beside Doug again, this time with an iPad in hand. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "I wanted to let you know we've been in contact with our ground team in Los Angeles. They're very sorry about the booking error." "It's really not a problem anymore," Doug assured her. "We appreciate that, but we'd still like to make it right. We've arranged for priority baggage handling when we land, and we'd like to offer you a voucher for your next flight." Doug was taken aback by the gesture. "That's very generous, but really unnecessary." "We insist," Tina said with a smile. "Also, the gentleman in 14A," she paused, clearly avoiding saying Keanu's name out loud, "asked me to give you this." She handed Doug a cocktail napkin. On it, written in neat, blocky handwriting, was a note. "Doug, if you're not in a rush after we land, come say hi at baggage claim. Life's too short for bad first impressions." Doug read the note twice, not quite believing it. He looked up at Tina, who gave him a knowing smile. "Is he serious?" Doug asked quietly. "He seemed genuine," she replied. "He mentioned something about both heading to the same part of town." As Tina moved on to the next row, Doug carefully folded the napkin and put it in his jacket pocket. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to how celebrity encounters were supposed to go, that he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. The rest of the flight passed without incident. Doug tried to focus on reviewing notes for his presentation on his tablet, but his mind kept wandering back to the note in his pocket. What was Keanu's angle? Was this a private joke at his expense? Some kind of celebrity mind game? But nothing in their brief interaction had suggested Keanu was anything but sincere. If online stories were to be believed, the actor was known for random acts of kindness, for treating fans and workers with respect. Still, Doug found it hard to accept that someone he'd been rude to would want anything to do with him after the flight. About an hour before landing, Pete came through the cabin with a fresh round of drinks. When he reached Doug's row, he leaned down slightly. "Just to give you a heads up," Pete said quietly. "There are a few people toward the back who recognize Mr. Reeves. When we land, it might get a bit hectic. If you want to avoid that, I can arrange for you to deplane first." The offer was tempting. Doug could make a clean escape, avoid any further embarrassment, and pretend this whole bizarre incident never happened. He could go to his hotel, prepare for his presentation, and eventually this would become just a strange story to tell at dinner parties. "Actually," Doug heard himself saying, "I think I'll stick with the regular deplaning, but thanks for the offer." Pete nodded and moved on. Doug wasn't sure why he'd turned down the easy exit. Maybe it was the note burning a hole in his pocket. Or maybe it was something about the genuine way Keanu had spoken to him, like he was a person, not just an annoying fan or an inconvenience. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Doug looked out at the sprawling city below, the grid of streets extending to the ocean. He'd been to LA dozens of times for business, but this trip already felt different. Whatever happened next, whether he actually took Keanu up on his offer or not, this was a day he wouldn't forget. The landing was smooth, the plane touching down with barely a bump. As they taxied to the gate, the usual rustling began. People retrieving items from overhead bins despite the seatbelt sign, checking phones the moment they were allowed to, preparing for the rush to exit despite having nowhere urgent to be. Doug remained seated, watching as Keanu gathered his simple backpack, but made no move to stand up. The actor caught his eye across the cabin and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. For the first time since the whole incident began, Doug felt a sense of calm settle over him. Whatever happened next, he had a feeling it would be all right. The day that had started so terribly had taken the strangest detour, but maybe, just maybe, it would end better than he could have imagined. The deplaning process was always the same. A slow, shuffling line of impatient travelers eager to stretch their legs after hours of confinement. Doug waited his turn, letting the passengers in front of him clear out before standing to retrieve his carry-on from the overhead bin. He noticed Keanu had also stayed seated, seemingly in no rush despite being in one of the first rows. As Doug made his way toward the front, he felt his phone buzzing repeatedly in his pocket. No doubt his son sending more messages about the video. That conversation would have to wait. When he reached Keanu's row, the actor stood up, smoothly joining the thinning line of departing passengers. They exited the plane together, nodding thanks to the flight crew gathered at the door. "First time in LA?" Keanu asked as they walked up the jetway. No, I come out pretty regularly for work, Doug replied. You live here, right? Keanu nodded. When I'm not filming somewhere else. The conversation was so ordinary, so casual that Doug almost forgot who he was talking to. Then they emerged into the terminal and reality crashed back in. A small cluster of people waiting at the gate immediately noticed Keanu. Doug saw the moment of recognition ripple through them. Widened eyes, nudging elbows, phones raised discreetly and some not so discreetly. To his credit, Keanu seemed neither bothered nor particularly interested in the attention. He continued walking at the same unhurried pace, occasionally nodding politely to those bold enough to make eye contact. Does that ever get old? Doug asked quietly as they walked side by side through the terminal. People staring, taking pictures? Keanu considered the question thoughtfully. You get used to it. It's part of the job. Still, Doug persisted, must be exhausting being on all the time. It's all about perspective, Keanu replied. There are worse problems to have. As they approached the main concourse, a uniformed driver appeared holding a sign that simply read Reeves. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, brightened when he spotted Keanu. Mr. Reeves. Welcome back to Los Angeles, the driver said warmly. Thanks, Tom, Keanu replied, shaking the man's hand. Good to see you. Doug hesitated, unsure if this was where they would part ways. The note had mentioned baggage claim, but clearly Keanu had transportation arranged. As if reading his thoughts, Keanu turned to Doug. We still need to get our checked bags. Tom can wait for us. Tom nodded in agreement. I'll meet you at the designated pickup area, sir. As the driver departed, Keanu and Doug continued toward baggage claim. The actor moved through the airport with the ease of someone who had done this countless times, navigating the crowds efficiently but never appearing rushed. So this presentation you mentioned, Keanu said as they rode the escalator down to baggage claim. Anything interesting? Doug was surprised by the genuine interest in the question. It's for a mixed-use development downtown. Residential units above retail space, some sustainable design elements. Nothing that would interest most people. I'm not most people, Keanu replied with a slight smile. I find architecture fascinating. The way buildings shape experiences, create communities. The baggage claim area was crowded. Travelers from multiple flights clustered around various carousels. Their flight's bags hadn't started arriving yet, so they found a relatively quiet spot to wait. Doug was acutely aware of the occasional glances from fellow passengers, the whispered conversations, the surreptitious photos. Through it all, Keanu remained relaxed, his attention focused entirely on their conversation. The project's actually part of a larger initiative, Doug found himself explaining, revitalizing some neglected areas downtown while trying not to push out the existing community. It's a balancing act. Gentrification versus renewal, Keanu nodded. Complex problem. Exactly, Doug said, surprised by the actor's grasp of the issue. My firm is working with a local nonprofit to ensure affordable housing remains part of the plan. Which nonprofit? Keanu asked. Future Foundations, Doug replied. They're hosting an event tonight, actually. My presentation is part of... He stopped mid-sentence, a sudden realization dawning on him. Wait, the charity gala at the Hamilton Hotel? Are you... Keanu's eyes crinkled with amusement. Attending? Yes, I've supported Future Foundations for years. Doug stared at him in disbelief. You're the celebrity guest they've been teasing in the emails? Guilty, Keanu admitted. I try to help when I can. Housing security matters. Before Doug could process this coincidence, the baggage carousel sprang to life with a mechanical groan. Luggage began appearing and travelers crowded forward. Black hardside roller, Doug said, describing his suitcase. And yours? Black duffel, Keanu replied. With a small red tag. They spotted Keanu's bag first, the actor smoothly retrieving it from the carousel. Doug's appeared a few minutes later and he grabbed it, checking the luggage tag to confirm it was his. So, Keanu said as they walked toward the exit, what are your plans for getting to the hotel? I was going to grab a rideshare, Doug replied. My company booked me at the Hamilton since that's where the event is. Keanu gestured toward where Tom was now visible, waiting by a black SUV. I'm headed there too. Want a ride? The offer caught Doug off guard. I couldn't impose. It's on my way, Keanu said simply. Since it's the same destination. Doug hesitated only briefly before nodding. That would be great, thanks. Tom took their bags, storing them in the trunk, while Keanu and Doug climbed into the spacious back seat. The interior was cool and quiet, a welcome respite from the airport chaos. As they pulled away from the curb, Doug found himself in yet another surreal moment, sharing a car with Keanu Reeves, heading to the same charity event, after having yelled at him on a plane just hours earlier. The absurdity of it all hit him suddenly, and he couldn't help but laugh. Keanu looked at him curiously. Something funny? Just this whole situation, Doug admitted. If you had told me this morning that I'd end up sharing a ride with Keanu Reeves by the afternoon, I would have thought you were crazy. Keanu smiled. Life's full of unexpected turns. They rode in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the city passing by outside the tinted windows. Then Keanu spoke again. You mentioned you have a son? Doug nodded. 16 years old. Big fan of yours, by the way. He texted me on the plane after seeing a video of our encounter. Keanu winced sympathetically. Social media. Nothing stays private anymore. He's probably freaking out right now, Doug said, checking his phone to find 7 unread messages from his son. I should probably call him before this gets any more out of hand. Go ahead, Keanu encouraged. I don't mind. Doug dialed, and his son picked up on the first ring. Dad. Oh my God, is it true? Are you on a plane with Keanu Reeves? The video is everywhere, and Joey said his brother saw it on. Take a breath, buddy, Doug interrupted, unable to keep the amusement from his voice. Yes, there was a seating mix-up, and yes, it was with Keanu Reeves. So did you talk to him? What's he like? Did he mention John Wick? Or The Matrix? The questions tumbled out rapidly. Doug glanced at Keanu, who was politely pretending not to listen, gazing out the window with a small smile playing on his lips. Actually, Doug said carefully, I'm in a car with him right now. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Then what? Dad, you're not serious. Dead serious, Doug replied. We're both heading to the same event in L.A. No way. No way. Can I talk to him? Please, Dad. Just for a second? Doug looked questioningly at Keanu, who shrugged good-naturedly and held out his hand for the phone. Hey there, Keanu said when Doug passed him the device. This is Keanu. Even from a foot away, Doug could hear his son's excited shout. Keanu chatted with the teenager for a minute or two, answering questions about upcoming projects and laughing at whatever enthusiastic responses he was receiving. Your dad seems like a good guy, Keanu said before handing the phone back. A bit stressed earlier, but that happens to everyone. When Doug took the phone back, his son was practically hyperventilating. Dad, this is the coolest thing ever. No one at school is going to believe this. I should go now, but I'll call you later with all the details, Doug promised. Ending the call amid his son's continued exclamations, he turned to Keanu. You've just secured my world's coolest dad status for at least a month. Thank you for that, Keanu smiled. Happy to help. Being a teenager is tough. They need wins sometimes. You have kids? Doug asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. No, Keanu replied simply without elaboration. Something in his tone discouraged further inquiry on that topic. The car slowed as they hit downtown traffic. Outside the window, Los Angeles unfolded in all its contradictory glory. Gleaming skyscrapers alongside homeless encampments. Luxury boutiques next to boarded-up storefronts. This city, Keanu mused, following Doug's gaze. So much potential, so many challenges. That's what makes the work Future Foundations does so important, Doug agreed. Everyone deserves safe, stable housing. As they discussed the nonprofit's various initiatives, Doug found himself increasingly impressed by Keanu's knowledge and genuine commitment to the cause. This wasn't celebrity philanthropy as a publicity stunt. The actor clearly cared deeply and had done his homework. So, Keanu said as the hotel came into view, an elegant building with a modernist facade. Nervous about your presentation? A little less now, Doug admitted. Something tells me my airplane story might break the ice nicely. The Hamilton Hotel lobby buzzed with activity as Doug and Keanu entered together. The space was elegant without being ostentatious, warm lighting, tasteful artwork, and a diverse crowd of well-dressed attendees gathering for the Future Foundation's gala. Doug noticed the immediate ripple effect of Keanu's presence. Conversations paused, heads turned, and the energy in the room shifted. Yet the actor moved through it all with the same unruffled calm he'd displayed on the plane, nodding politely to those who caught his eye but continuing toward the reception desk without slowing. "I should check in," Doug said, suddenly aware that he was still in his rumpled travel clothes. "The presentation's not until 7, but I should freshen up." "Same," Keanu agreed. "Maybe see you at the event?" Doug nodded, feeling a strange reluctance to end their unexpected companionship. "Definitely. And thanks again for everything." Keanu gave him a small smile and a nod before heading to a separate reception desk, where the staff clearly recognized him immediately. At his own check-in, Doug was handed a welcome packet for the Future Foundation's event along with his room key. The desk clerk, a young woman with a professional smile, looked at him with sudden recognition. "Mr. Henderson?" she asked, lowering her voice slightly. "From the airplane incident with Mr. Reeves?" Doug felt his stomach drop. "How did you—" "It's all over social media," she explained, having the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Someone named the video Karen Meets Keanu, even though you're obviously not a Karen." Doug groaned. "Great. If it helps," she added quickly. "Most of the comments are actually about how cool Mr. Reeves was about it. And there's already follow-up videos of you two talking on the plane and leaving the airport together. People are loving the redemption arc." "Redemption arc?" Doug repeated, feeling like he'd somehow stepped into an alternate reality where his personal embarrassment was public entertainment. "You know, how you went from yelling at him to becoming friends. It's very heartwarming." Doug thanked her weakly and headed for the elevator, wondering just how widespread the video had become. In his room, he immediately opened his laptop to assess the damage. Sure enough, a quick search brought up multiple versions of the incident, from different angles and with various captions. The original had over 2 million views already. The follow-up videos had fewer views but were quickly gaining traction. As the desk clerk had mentioned, most of the comments focused on Keanu's legendary niceness rather than Doug's momentary rudeness. One comment stood out. "This is so classic Keanu. Guy yells at him and instead of being offended he makes friends with him. We don't deserve this man." Doug closed the laptop and lay back on the bed staring at the ceiling. The day had been a roller coaster of emotions, frustration, embarrassment, surprise, and now a strange sort of relief. If he was going to have a viral moment, at least it seemed to be trending positive. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his boss. "Henderson," his boss began without preamble. "What's this I'm seeing about you and Keanu Reeves on a plane?" Doug sighed. "It's a long story, save it for later. Listen, this is perfect timing. Word is that Future Foundations is looking to expand their corporate partnerships. Having their celebrity spokesman apparently buddied up with our presenter? That's marketing gold. We aren't." Doug tried to explain that he and Keanu weren't actually friends, but his boss steamrolled over his protests. "Just make sure to get a photo with him at the event, for the company's social media. And don't mess up the presentation." The call ended as abruptly as it had begun. Doug showered and changed into his suit, all the while rehearsing his presentation notes. Despite the unexpected social media attention and his boss's opportunistic reaction, he was determined to stay focused on the real purpose of the event, supporting affordable housing initiatives. When he arrived at the hotel's grand ballroom at 6:30, the gala was already in full swing. Tables adorned with simple but elegant centerpieces filled the space, and a small stage was set up at the front. A banner with the Future Foundation's logo hung above it, alongside images of their housing projects. Doug checked in with the event coordinator, who directed him to a reserved table near the front. To his surprise, his place card was at the same table as Keanu's, along with several foundation executives and major donors. As Doug made his way to the table, he felt eyes following him. Several people whispered as he passed, and he caught fragments of conversation. The guy from the plane, and viral video. When he reached the table, only 2 people were seated so far, an older woman who introduced herself as the foundation's board chairperson, and a younger man who was apparently the development director. Both were polite but gave Doug knowing looks that confirmed they, too, had seen the video. "Mr. Reeves mentioned you two had quite an interesting first meeting," the chairperson said with a twinkle in her eye. "That's putting it mildly," Doug admitted. "Not my finest moment." "Don't worry about it," the development director assured him. Keanu thought it was funny, said it was refreshing to meet someone who wasn't trying to impress him. Doug wasn't sure that accidentally insulting someone was better than deliberately trying to impress them. but he appreciated the generous interpretation. More guests arrived at the table, and Doug found himself repeatedly explaining his connection to Keanu, each time downplaying his own rudeness and emphasizing the actor's graciousness. By the time dinner was served, he had the story polished to a brief, self-deprecating anecdote that reliably earned laughs. Keanu himself arrived just as the salad course was being cleared, apologizing quietly for his lateness. He took the empty seat beside Doug, greeting everyone at the table warmly. "Sorry about the viral video situation," Keanu said quietly to Doug as the main course was served. "Fame can be like a spotlight. Sometimes it catches people around you too." "It's not your fault," Doug replied. "And honestly, my son thinks I'm the coolest dad on the planet right now, so there's that." Keanu laughed, a genuine warm sound. Silver linings. When it came time for the presentations, the foundation director introduced Doug with a knowing smile and a brief reference to his already famous first meeting with their celebrity supporter. The audience chuckled, and Doug found himself approaching the podium with less nervousness than he'd expected. "As some of you may have seen online today," Doug began, "I'm not always at my best when traveling." The audience laughed, putting him immediately at ease. "But unlike my airplane etiquette, our development project is something I'm actually proud of." The presentation went smoothly from there. Doug spoke about the mixed-use development plans, the affordable housing component, and the partnership with future foundations. Throughout, he emphasized the human impact, how thoughtful urban development could strengthen communities rather than displacing them. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic. As Doug returned to his seat, Keanu gave him a thumbs up and a genuine smile. "Great job," the actor told him. "You really care about this stuff. It shows." "Thanks," Doug replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the spotlight he'd just been under. "It matters, you know. Everyone deserves a place to call home." The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Doug found himself relaxing, enjoying conversations with the other guests, and even posing for a few photos, including one with Keanu that his boss had specifically requested. As the event wound down, Keanu was pulled away by foundation staff for some final discussions. Before leaving, he stopped by Doug's chair. "Good meeting you, Doug," he said, extending his hand. Despite the unusual start, Doug shook his hand firmly. "The honor was mine. And again, I'm sorry for already forgotten," Keanu assured him. "Safe travels home." With that, he was gone, immediately surrounded by people wanting his attention. Doug stayed until the end of the event, helping the foundation staff pack up some materials and exchanging contact information with potential partners. When he finally returned to his hotel room, he found a small package had been delivered. Inside was a bottle of the same wine they had been served in first class, with a note. "For your next flight. Turbulence happens." K.R. Doug smiled, placing the bottle carefully in his suitcase to take home. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Just saw the videos. Quite a day you've had, call me." As Doug dialed her number, he glanced at his laptop where several social media tabs were still open. The newest video, uploaded just hours ago, showed him and Keanu laughing together at the gala. The top comment read simply, "From Airplane Karen to Keanu's new friend. This is the wholesome content we need." Doug laughed to himself. 24 hours ago, he'd been rushing to catch a flight, stressed and irritable. Now he was part of a viral moment, had given a successful presentation, and somehow, improbably, had a story he'd be telling for the rest of his life. As his wife answered the phone, Doug realized some turbulence, whether on planes or in life, sometimes led to the most unexpected destinations.